There are friendships that seem unbreakable, bonds forged not by blood, but by shared childhood dreams and promises whispered in the quiet hours of youth. Daniel Ward and Marcus Hale were such friends. They grew up in the same neighborhood, two boys with nothing but ambition in their pockets. Daniel had an eye for beauty, for design, for structure. While other children played with toys, Daniel sketched rooftops, arches, and staircases on scraps of paper scavenged from his father's garage. His gift was undeniable. Marcus, on the other hand, possessed charm. He could talk his way into any circle, convince anyone of anything. He was the flame to Daniel's stone, and together they were unstoppable. When they were young men, they would sit on the rusted fire escape of Marcus's old apartment, gazing at the skyline. "One day," Marcus would say, "you'll design something that pierces the heavens, and I'll be the man living inside it." They would laugh, Daniel shaking his head, Marcus's grin flashing under the city's glow. It was a promise, a dream. Years later, that dream appeared to come true. Daniel, now a respected architect with a rising reputation, was commissioned to design a mansion unlike any other. And who had the money, the connections, and the land to make it real? His oldest friend, Marcus Hale. The project was monumental, a sprawling estate of stone and glass, poised on the cliffs above the ocean. Daniel poured his soul into every detail. The grand staircase that spiraled like a seashell, the vast atrium designed to catch the sunlight at dawn, the hidden corridors built not for necessity, but for mystery. To him, this mansion was not just a commission, it was his masterpiece. And it was for Marcus. While Daniel labored over blueprints late into the night, Marcus would bring him expensive whiskey, clapping him on the shoulder. "Brother," Marcus would say, "when this house is built, everyone will know your name. You'll be immortal." And Daniel believed him. There was more to Daniel's happiness then. Evelyn. She was his fiancée, a woman of elegance and quiet strength. She admired his work, listened to his dreams, and often visited the construction site just to watch him shape the future with his hands. Daniel thought he had everything: love, friendship, and a legacy rising brick by brick on the cliffs. But foundations, no matter how strong, can hide cracks. And sometimes, the cracks are not in the stone, but in the people we trust. For while Daniel dreamed of a future built on loyalty and love, Marcus dreamed of something else. Not of friendship, not of gratitude, but of power. And he had already set in motion a betrayal that would shatter Daniel's world. The week the mansion's skeleton climbed past the tree line, the coastal fog grew heavier, as if the sea itself wished to hide what was about to happen. The frame rose like a cathedral ribcage against the sky, scaffolds stitched to its flanks, tarps billowing with the breath of the wind. Daniel walked those beams as if they were avenues he had dreamed first and summoned second. He knew the sound each plank made when stepped upon, the tenor of each nail's bite. He knew the way morning light would travel from the atrium to the gallery, how evening would linger in the library's high corners like a secret. It was all his. It was all for Marcus. Yet in the hush between hammers and saws, another rhythm ticked, a different metronome, counting down to an evening of immaculate cruelty. Marcus loved evenings. He said it was the time when the city loosened its tie and the truth stepped out onto balconies for a cigarette. That Thursday, on a balcony of his newly acquired penthouse, he poured 2 glasses of deep amber whiskey and handed one to Evelyn. The city coiled at their feet, lights like veins beneath a smooth skin of night. "To the Cliff House," he said, raising his glass. "To its genius." Evelyn held the heavy crystal, hesitating. She had come at his insistence, told herself it was harmless. Marcus wanted to talk about Daniel's surprise engagement party, about the art installation for the atrium, about anything except the way he watched her at every gathering, the way his compliments slid across the line between warmth and temptation. "It's Daniel's night," she said, setting the glass down untouched. "It is." Marcus's smile was a practiced instrument. "And yet, you're here." "I shouldn't be." "You're right," he murmured, stepping closer, not quite touching her. "You shouldn't be anywhere you don't choose to be." She turned away, looking toward the sea. She had always admired Marcus's confidence, his effortless command of any room, but tonight the magnetism felt like a current pulling her toward a dark drop. He didn't crowd her. That wasn't his method. He created space and then filled it with possibility. "You know what I envy about Daniel?" Marcus asked lightly. "The part of him that can stare at a blank page and see a world. He used to draw us out of nothing. 2 kids on a fire escape, and he'd sketch skylines for the lives we didn't have yet. He believed in us before anyone else did." "He still does," Evelyn said. Marcus nodded, his voice softening. "Yes, he believes, and that belief makes him blind." Evelyn flinched. "Blind to what?" "To what it costs to make a dream survive contact with reality." Marcus's hand hovered above the balcony rail, as if balancing an invisible coin. "Dreams need patrons. Patrons demand receipts. Receipts become power. Power changes the room." She frowned. "This sounds like a pitch." "It is a pitch." He finally turned to her fully. "For Daniel's future. For yours. We already have a future." "Do you?" The question landed too calmly. "You have a man whose gift is building palaces in the air, and a world eager to live in them without ever paying the rent. You think his name will be celebrated? For a season, perhaps. Then imitated, then diluted, then forgotten. That is the nature of fame without foundation." Evelyn bristled. "His foundation is integrity. Integrity doesn't pay subcontractors when markets turn," Marcus said. "It doesn't hold back the tide when fashion shifts. But capital does. Influence does. My last name does." He let that hang, then gentled it. "If Daniel is to be great, he must be guarded. And I can guard him. I can elevate him beyond the reach of petty hands." "And how exactly would you do that?" "By making the Cliff House mine." Evelyn laughed then, a short, disbelieving sound. "It is yours, Marcus." "Legally, yes. Symbolically, it is Daniel's. The narrative attaches to him. I want it attached to me." "And how does that help him?" "It helps him because he will be attached to me." He stepped closer, and now she could smell the whiskey, the faintest trace of expensive cologne like smoke and cedar. "I will be the face. He will be the engine. He will design for a lifetime without the burden of being devoured by the world's appetite. He will lose a headline and gain an empire." Evelyn shook her head. "Daniel won't let you take credit for his work." "He won't have to let me," Marcus said gently. "It will happen as naturally as a tide claims a shore no one bothered to name." She felt heat rise in her chest. "And you brought me here to ask me to help you steal his life?" "I brought you here," Marcus said, voice lowered, "to give you the life you already want but can't say out loud." She stared. The room stilled around the words. "You love him," Marcus said. "I do not doubt that. But in loving him, you spend half your time standing in his shadow, and the other half worrying the shadow will vanish. You fear poverty in a beautiful room. You fear becoming a curator of a man who belongs to his work. You fear the nights he will not come home, because the house he is designing asks more of him than you can afford to give." "Stop," she said. "Call it cruel to name the truth," he said, not stopping. "But I have watched you, Evelyn. I have watched you watch me watching him. You look at me when he forgets to look at you, and you wonder what it would be like to be a priority, not a principle, to be loved not as a part of a noble story, but as the story." Her eyes flashed. "You confuse power with love." "Power is the scaffolding," he said softly. "Love is the view. I can build both." Her hand found the glass she had refused at the start. She drank, perhaps to swallow the tremor in her throat. The city blurred briefly. "What would you have me do?" she asked, voice steadying out of pride as much as anything. "I would have you do what you already do best," Marcus said. "Appear at his side, calm his doubts, celebrate his victories. And when the night of the unveiling comes, I would have you stand with me under the camera's gaze, as my fiancé." The word struck like a bell. She set the glass down too hard. "You're out of your mind." "No," Marcus said. "I am in it entirely, and you will be too by week's end." She was already turning to leave when Marcus added, almost as an afterthought, "The bank will call him in the morning." She paused. "What bank?" "The one that underwrote 3 separate material orders under your name." Marcus lifted his phone, tapped once, and a photo shone from the screen. A contract, her digital signature, numbers that made her head swim. "I had them prepare a bridge loan. It is quite legal, quite traceable." "I didn't sign anything." "You did," he said, tapping the image. "A form Daniel forwarded for you to sign months ago regarding delivery schedules. The clause embedded was generous. He didn't read it carefully. Neither did you. Trust makes thieves of us all." For a second, the room tilted. She reached for the balcony rail as if it were the last honest thing in the world. "Why would you—" "So that when the bank calls," Marcus said, "and panic swells, there will be a choice. To dig for money you do not have, or to accept an arrangement that removes your names from harm. I will offer a solution. The papers will use mine as the architect, a harmless oversight, an error of communication in the press release. Daniel will swallow it for the sake of stabilizing the build. And you," he looked at her as if he were measuring, "you will come to my side at the gala and smile." "You set a trap." "I built a path," he corrected, "a path that spares him ruin. And costs him his name." "Only on this house," Marcus said with a shrug that made the world seem like a chessboard. "The next will be bigger. The next will be ours. You and I, we will be the patrons to his genius. We will raise him high enough to bring heaven to heel." Evelyn stared at him as if he were a ledger that had come to life. She hated him then. She hated him and she feared him. And in that fear she felt a pulse of recognition. The world does not bend for the virtuous. It bends for the unafraid. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet. "If I say no?" Marcus's smile finally reached his eyes, but it wasn't warmth. It was the cold gleam of a blade. "You won't." The bank called at 9:12 the next morning. Daniel was on site early, walking the perimeter with the foreman, examining the glass shipment schedule, making notes about the steel treads for the staircase. His phone buzzed and kept buzzing. He stepped away from the clatter to answer, still smiling from a thought about how the ocean light would spill down the second-floor landing like water from a bowl. The smile died fast. The call became 2 calls, then 5. Numbers he didn't recognize. A voice that said, "Exposure." Another that said, "Signature." Another that said, "Default." And the repetition of Evelyn's name in a context that made no sense. He called her, but it went to voicemail. By noon, his foreman was asking if they should halt deliveries. By 1, a courier arrived with a folder heavy as a verdict. Daniel sat on a cold concrete step in the shade of the future library and read documents he did not remember authorizing. There it was, a clause, a single paragraph nested in a forest of innocuous phrases, committing them to financial terms that could drown a smaller firm. He closed his eyes. He recalled asking Evelyn, months ago, to click a confirmation for a shipping schedule while he was on a site tour. He had been buried that day. He had trusted completely. He called Marcus. "Brother," Marcus answered warmly. "You sound like someone who needs a rescue boat." Daniel exhaled. "You heard." "I hear everything," Marcus said, "and I have good news. I can fix this." "What?" Daniel asked, stunned. "I've been in touch with the bank since this morning," Marcus said easily. "It seems there was confusion with the paperwork, a clause that never should have been attached. They assure me there is a solution, a restructuring of liability. I cover the immediate exposure. In exchange, we revise the way the project is credited publicly to reflect the consortium that truly brought it to life." "The consortium," Daniel said slowly. "My firm, the investment partners, the builders," Marcus said. "And yes, your name, prominently included as the lead design consultant." Daniel felt heat flood his face. "Lead consultant? Brother," Marcus said, reasonable as rain. "This is a technical fix to a technical problem. You'll still be in every room. You'll still be compensated handsomely. The press, God bless them, rarely understands the nuance. They'll see your drawings and my signature and call it a triumph. We will laugh about this over dinner in 6 months. You're asking me to give you the house. I am asking you to protect your future, Marcus said, and the warmth dropped a degree. I am asking you to avoid a lawsuit that would freeze the site and stain your name over a clerical blunder. Daniel pictured the atrium suffocating under tarps, the scaffolds rusting, the crews laid off, the glass turned away at the dock. He pictured headlines that didn't bother with context. He also pictured nights on a fire escape, 2 boys making vows. He tasted something metallic. It's my design, he said quietly. And it will still be your design, Marcus said, within a structure that I will present to the world as the work of my house. Do not be romantic at the expense of the possible, Daniel. Be strategic. Save what matters. What matters is the truth, Daniel said, almost to himself. What matters, Marcus replied, is the story people will repeat. Let me tell it properly. Silence stretched. Wind dragged the sea's breath up the cliff. Evelyn, Daniel asked finally. They're saying her name like she did something. There was the faintest pause. She clicked a form she didn't understand. Marcus said, You asked her to help. She helped. Don't punish her for your trust. The words bit. Daniel turned them over and tasted the poison inside. I need to talk to her, he said. You should, Marcus said, tone smoothing again. And when you do, be kind. She loves you more than you see. When the call ended, Daniel stood very still. Men shouted measurements behind him. A gull's cry slashed the air and vanished. He felt the world tilt, not the sudden lurch of a fall, but the subtle regrading of land before a landslide. He dialed Evelyn again. This time she answered.
I've been with my mother.
She lied, well enough that he almost didn't hear the extra breath. I saw the calls. Daniel, what happened? He told her. As he spoke, he listened for the ring of astonishment, the innocent fury on his behalf. He heard it. She supplied all the right notes. But somewhere inside the melody, a string was out of tune. It's my fault, she breathed. You asked me to click, and I clicked without reading. Oh God, Daniel, I'm so sorry. Don't, he said quickly, because the apology felt like a weapon pressed into his hand. We will fix it. Marcus called me too, she said softly. He said he could intervene. He closed his eyes. He can. At a cost. He said it would be temporary, she murmured. Public credit, not real ownership. For a time. To steady the ship. Do you believe him? Daniel asked. A long silence, then, I want to believe anything that spares you harm. He put his hand on the raw frame of a doorway and felt splinters press into his skin. Meet me tonight, he said. We'll go over everything. She agreed. They hung up and he stood listening to the echo of his own voice, thin against the machinery of the day. By dusk, the bank's language had softened under Marcus's good offices. By night, a draft of the revised press packet arrived. The headline was a perfumed lie. The photographs were threadbare of truth. The body copy called the design, A Vision Realized by the Hale Foundation in Collaboration with the Ward Atelier. It was the kind of wording that lawyers love and artists choke on. Daniel read it twice, then a third time. He drove to Evelyn's apartment under a sky that looked bruised. She met him at the door with candlelight behind her, the place smelling faintly of roses and the sea. She took his hands. She wept. He held her and felt his own anger dissolve into something like resignation, the way soldiers feel when the order arrives too late to matter. Say we survive this, she whispered into his shoulder. Say we let Marcus tell his story this once. After the ribbon is cut, after the cameras leave, you claim every truth that remains. We move forward. We build the next house with your name etched in stone. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to be a man who could swallow a disgrace and call it a compromise, then wake the next day and begin again. He wanted to live inside a world where good faith still mattered. He nodded. We'll fix the credit after the opening, he said. This is temporary. She kissed his cheek and closed her eyes, and a single tear slid across the bridge of her nose. He mistook it for relief. It was something closer to mourning. 2 weeks later, the mansion stood dressed for its first true audience. Lanterns hung in the trees along the drive like constellations captured and sold. Valets took keys from hands that had never known the weight of a hammer. Photographers gathered at the threshold as if the doors themselves were news. Daniel arrived early, in a suit he rarely wore, and walked the rooms in silence. He trailed fingertips along the ribbon of the staircase he had sketched years ago in a coffee-stained notebook. He stood beneath the atrium and watched the light he had predicted gather and descend exactly on cue. He listened to the house breathe. It was perfect, and not his. He found Marcus in the gallery, rehearsing a smile. The man was lacquered in achievement, the kind of confidence that made even velvet seem like armor. He embraced Daniel as if nothing complicated bound them. "Tonight is the beginning," Marcus murmured. "Of what?" Daniel asked. "Of belonging." Marcus stepped back, studied him. "You look like an architect of kingdoms." Before Daniel could answer, a publicist hurried over, breathless. "We need you both at the step and repeat. Mr. Hale, the network is here, and—" she glanced at Daniel. "We'll bring Mr. Ward in for the design segment after the keynote." "The keynote," Daniel repeated. "My keynote," Marcus said gently. "My keynote," Marcus said gently. "It would be a small thing, anyone would say, a matter of order, an arrangement of introductions, a harmless theater of gratitude." Daniel stepped into the light and it became a flood. The speeches were polished illusions. Marcus thanked teams and donors, named philanthropic arms and corporate partners, spoke of culture and legacy as if he had carved them with his hands. Eventually he spoke Daniel's name. He did not forget it, but he framed it as a precious instrument in an orchestra Marcus conducted. Cameras flashed. Applause rolled. The story was cast in bronze. Then Evelyn stepped into the light. It happened like a magic trick. One moment she was a shape at the margin, the next she was at Marcus's side, fingers threaded with his. The publicist had prepared the reveal. The crowd gasped in the exact way planners dream of. Someone shouted, "Congratulations!" and a murmuration of voices picked up the word and scattered it like rice. Daniel did not breathe. For a moment he was a stone set in a stream, water parting around him as if he had never belonged to the river's path at all. Evelyn turned her face toward him, and something like apology passed across it, thin, useless, too late. Marcus lifted their joined hands. "My fiancée," he announced to the room that swallowed every story whole and burped contentedly afterward. 1,000 lenses blinked. Daniel's heart did not break. It cracked with the clean sound of porcelain struck and spiderwebbed all at once. The air smelled of lemon oil and lilies. The floor beneath him might as well have been ice. Across the room, the staircase coiled upward, a promise he had made to a future that no longer recognized him. He could have lunged. He could have shouted. He could have hurled the truth into that bright pit until it swallowed him along with everything else. Instead, Daniel smiled. A small and perfect smile that fit his face like a mask, cut from his own skin. He stepped back into the shadow of a column he had placed to draw the eye toward the art wall. He let the light do as it pleased, with other men. He waited. And as he waited, something colder than grief and sharper than rage slid into him, a blade settling into a sheath it had always been meant to occupy. He felt the house around him, felt the way the rooms connected, the currents of sound and sight, the angles that turned whispers into echoes. He had designed this stage. He would not die upon it. He would write a different ending. The morning after the unveiling should have been Daniel's coronation. Instead, it was his funeral. Though no casket, no flowers, no priest marked the occasion. His death was quieter, more insidious. It came in the shape of whispers, headlines, and contracts that dissolved like ash in his hands. By dawn, newspapers and glossy magazines had splashed Marcus Hale across their covers. Visionary tycoon unveils cliffside masterpiece. Beneath the headlines, photographs of Marcus in his tailored suit, Evelyn glowing at his side, her engagement ring catching the light as though it alone powered the chandelier above. Daniel's name appeared only once, buried in the fine print. Design consultant. The world did not see him as the architect of brilliance, but as a subordinate, an assistant whose pencil had traced the edges of Marcus's grand dream. One column even dared to mock him. A man of drafts and drafts only, perhaps destined never to finish anything on his own. When Daniel arrived at his office that morning, the silence was suffocating. Phones that once rang with eager inquiries were mute. His assistant, eyes downcast, whispered that 3 clients had cancelled their contracts before noon. By the end of the week, all but one had withdrawn, unwilling to associate with a man rumored to have inflated his role in another's success. The mansion, the work of his hands, the cathedral of his soul, was now Marcus's trophy. Daniel's greatest creation had become the instrument of his ruin. Evelyn did not return home.
And they did. Within 6 months, his savings were gone. His reputation was gone. His fiancée was gone. When he walked through the city, people who once greeted him with admiration now averted their eyes, or worse, smirked. He overheard the words fraud, failure, forgotten. Every whisper was a hammer blow. One night, standing before the cliffs, Daniel stared at the mansion silhouetted against the moon. Its windows glowed with golden light, laughter spilling from within. Marcus's laughter, Evelyn's laughter. It was a beacon of triumph for them, and a gravestone for him. For a long moment, he considered ending everything there. One step forward, one plunge into the black mouth of the sea, to let the tide claim him and erase the pain. But as the wind whipped around him, another thought took root. Why should he give them that satisfaction? Why should he vanish, leaving the world to believe their story, their lie? He would not die. He would not forgive. He would wait. And when the time was right, he would return, not as the man they mocked, but as something sharper, colder, unstoppable. The house was his design, and one day it would be his weapon. Years passed. The mansion on the cliffs, once Daniel's dream, then his execution ground, became a landmark of luxury. Society whispered its name with reverence. The Hale Estate. Celebrities posed in its grand hall. Politicians attended Marcus's galas, and Evelyn played hostess with the grace of a queen. To the world, the house stood as Marcus's crown jewel. But in the shadows of the city, a different story was being written. Daniel Ward no longer existed. He had died the night Evelyn slipped her hand into Marcus's, beneath the chandelier's glow. What remained was something colder, sharper, reborn with a new name, a new face for the world. He called himself Adrian Cross. Gone was the earnest architect who once spoke of skylines as poetry. In his place stood a man who had mastered silence, who studied people not as friends but as structures, weak points to be mapped, foundations to be tested, beams to be snapped. He had learned patience, the patience of stone, and the art of disguise. He had traveled far in those years of exile. Europe, where he apprenticed under investors and quietly absorbed their ruthless language of leverage. Asia, where he learned the power of appearances, of letting others underestimate you until the final moment. The Middle East, where he saw fortunes rise and crumble on whispers and handshakes. He became fluent in power the way a man becomes fluent in a tongue, through immersion, mistakes, and relentless practice. By the time he returned to his homeland, he carried not just money, but influence. Connections spun like spider silk across industries. He was no longer the man society pitied. He was the phantom who would haunt them all. Marcus Hale, meanwhile, had risen higher than even he had dreamed. His fortune had grown with the mansion as its beacon, but the higher he climbed, the thinner the air became. His appetite for risk was boundless. New ventures, new investments, new gambles. He had Evelyn on his arm, but rumors whispered of other women, secret affairs tucked behind velvet curtains. And though the papers called him brilliant, Marcus's brilliance was borrowed. He could charm investors, but he couldn't design innovation. His projects began to falter. Hotels delayed, partnerships soured, debts mounting quietly beneath the marble floors of his empire. Marcus smiled, as he always had, but behind the smile cracks deepened. That was when Adrian Cross appeared. It began subtly, as all traps do. A gala at the Hale Estate, one of Marcus's endless attempts to reassure society of his success. The atrium blazed with chandeliers, violins sang from the gallery, and the ocean roared beneath the cliffs like a restless beast. Daniel,
Adrian, arrived unannounced, dressed in a midnight suit, a silver tie-pin gleaming like a blade. He moved through the crowd with the assurance of a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere. When he approached Marcus, Evelyn by his side, there was no flicker of recognition in their eyes.
Adrian Cross, he introduced smoothly, extending his hand. I represent an investment firm with interest in your upcoming developments. Marcus's smile was automatic. He shook Adrian's hand firmly, though his eyes scanned for advantage, as they always did. Mr. Cross, you have chosen an excellent evening to join us. Evelyn studied him more closely. For a moment, her gaze lingered too long, something familiar in the angle of his jaw, the shadow of his eyes. But Daniel had prepared for this. He had let time carve new lines into his face, grown a beard trimmed sharp, adjusted his voice into a deeper register. He was both familiar and alien, a ghost wearing new flesh. A beautiful home, Adrian said, his eyes wandering deliberately across the atrium he had designed. It feels timeless. Marcus beamed, mistaking the praise as his own. Yes, it has become a symbol. My symbol. Indeed, Adrian replied, the faintest curl of irony in his tone. That night, Adrian spoke little, but listened much. He listened to Marcus boasting of projects already cracking beneath their weight. He listened to Evelyn's brittle laughter, too polished, too forced, as if gilding over fractures in her marriage. He listened, and he stored every word as carefully as an architect stores measurements. When he finally departed, Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. We must speak further, Mr. Cross. I think you and I will do great things together. Adrian inclined his head. Yes, great things. It was not a promise. It was a verdict.
In the weeks that followed, Adrian became a fixture in Marcus's life. They met in offices, in cigar lounges, at private dinners. Adrian invested in small ways, just enough to appear generous, never enough to reveal his hand. He praised Marcus's vision, whispered opportunities in his ear, and all the while mapped every weakness, every hidden debt, every failing partnership. But the true moment of triumph came the first evening Adrian was invited to stay at the Hale estate. Walking through the mansion again was like stepping into the skeleton of his past. His fingertips brushed the same banisters he had designed. His eyes traced the same corridors he had once sketched by candlelight. But now he saw it differently, not as a dreamer, but as a predator. Every room was a stage, every hallway a trap waiting to be sprung. He knew where sound carried, where shadows lingered, where the architecture itself whispered secrets to those who knew how to listen, and he alone knew, because he had built it. Evelyn watched Adrian with unease. Something in his manner unsettled her, the way he lingered in rooms as though remembering them, the way he sometimes looked at her with a familiarity that felt too close, too knowing. At night, when Marcus boasted of the mysterious investor's interest, Evelyn lay awake, her mind circling back to sketches Daniel once drew, to the intensity in his eyes when he worked.
Could it be? Number. Daniel was gone, destroyed, swallowed by his own failure. The man before her was wealth incarnate, self-assured and untouchable. And yet, when their eyes met across the dining table, she felt a flicker of guilt crawl up her spine. A ghost seemed to sit at the head of the table, silent, smiling. Adrian did not rush. Revenge is not served by impatience. It is built like architecture, brick by brick, beam by beam. He let Marcus believe he had found a powerful ally. He let Evelyn twist in her unease, never confirming nor denying the flicker of recognition in her heart. He walked the halls of the mansion as though they were his by right, because they were. And in the shadows of that house, he began to draw his new blueprints. Not of stone, not of glass, but of destruction.
A house, to the untrained eye, is a collection of rooms. To Daniel, it was a system, breathing, circulating, whispering to itself through vents and shafts and seams. He had drawn this one to feel inevitable, each space leading the guest like a rumor to want the next. In those nights when he walked its corridors as Adrian Cross, he listened to it speak. Its bones remembered him. Revenge, he had learned, required a similar system. Not a single strike, not a grand gesture,
but a series of valves and gates, pressures and releases, a choreography so patient that the victim mistook the tightening for a change in the weather. He would not simply destroy Marcus. He would make Marcus live inside his own collapse, hear it in the walls, feel it in the floors, breathe it in his sleep. He would teach him what architecture could do when its creator decided to turn the plan against its occupant. So Daniel began where all plans begin, with foundations. On paper, Adrian Cross was the salvation Marcus had always bragged he deserved. He arrived with a measured checkbook and impeccable discretion. He bought a minority stake in a languishing hotel project that had stalled because a contractor had quietly filed suit. Adrian paid the contractor in full, but not with money that cost him anything. He used a line of credit extended from a bank that owed him favors, secured by collateral that belonged to one of Marcus's shell companies. The documents were clean, the timing graceful. Newspapers praised Hale's steady hand and discerning partners. Marcus sent Adrian a midnight message, heavy with gratitude, and the kind of trust greedy men mistake for intimacy. "We make a good team," it read. Adrian replied, "We will make a great one." The next day, he let a different lever fall. There was a nightclub Marcus had thrown money at during a feverish summer, seduced by neon and the promise of celebrity. It was bleeding cash. Adrian quietly acquired the landlord's debt for pennies, then renegotiated the lease in a way that favored the tenant only if certain consulting fees were routed, through proxies, into an account Adrian controlled. On paper, he was the benevolent investor stabilizing nightlife in a fickle district. In practice, he attached a slow siphon to Marcus's wallet and hid the tubing beneath velvet. Marcus didn't notice. The monthly reports he skimmed glimmered with the right numbers. The losses could be attributed to brand repositioning and seasonality. He repeated those phrases to Evelyn over breakfast, as if they were charms that kept storms at bay. She nodded and looked at Adrian too long, then looked away. Daniel said little. He preferred to watch.
An empire is not a king so much as it is the people who answer when the king calls. If those hands shift their loyalty, the throne becomes a chair. Daniel began inviting Marcus's lieutenants to dinners, where the lighting flattered and the wine made the world seem newly possible. He sat with them one by one, held their gaze, and asked questions that made their own ambitions sound noble. Some were corrupt enough to be cheap. He did not want those. Some were loyal out of fear. He had no use for the timid. He wanted the ones suffocating beneath Marcus's charm, the ones who had done the calculus and realized their ceiling was the shape of his ego. To a CFO named Lydia, brilliant, undercredited, he offered a delicate exit, a position at a fund that would triple her salary and allow her to consult occasionally on Hale projects, just enough to remain familiar, just enough to loosen bolts in the right places. She accepted with a sigh that sounded like a chain dropping. To a head of development named Cole, competent, exhausted, he offered sunlight, a chance to lead something of his own at a partner firm Adrian had quietly acquired a month prior. "You've built too many castles under another man's banner," Adrian said. "Time to fly your own standard." Cole, who loved metaphors almost as much as he loved his neglected children, shook Adrian's hand, eyes bright. To Marcus's legal counsel, a hawk named Mendez, who never missed a stitch, Adrian offered nothing. He merely let Mendez see him listening. Men like that valued attention the way others valued gold. In time, Mendez would sell Marcus out for the privilege of being understood. Adrian never mentioned loyalty. He spoke of weather patterns and fatigue and wasted talent. He spoke gently of long games. He signed documents with a fountain pen that made every signature look like a vow. And when each of them stepped away from Marcus, some openly, some by inch, Adrian made sure their transitions looked like opportunities we celebrate. He sent champagne. He wrote notes of congratulations Marcus would see. He turned defection into a party for which Marcus paid the band. At the Hale estate, Adrian adopted the ritual of the wanderer. After dinner, with its chorus of crystal and calculated laughter, he would excuse himself and drift. He seemed to be admiring art, the curve of a stair, the composition of a sightline. He was. He was also testing. He spent long minutes in the library at midnight,
and learned precisely how the sea's wind bullied the chimney to send a note of mourning into the air duct above the liquor cabinet. He noted that when the north gallery's terrace doors were opened together, a cross-breath could push sound through the pivot wall into the adjacent guest suite. He confirmed that the service corridor's motion lights still hesitated 2 heartbeats before blooming to life, and that a man in a dark suit could pass through that tunnel like a rumor no one could catch. He had designed a whispering gallery into the dome above the atrium as a private pleasure years ago. Now he tested it from the shadows, while house staff lay down table linens below. The slightest scrape of a ring on the rail carried to the far side with uncanny clarity. He smiled. A small, private thing. On the 3rd evening of such drifting, he found Evelyn alone in the music room. The lamp was low, the piano closed, the scent of jasmine ghosting from a vase. She sat, hands clenched in her lap, as if her fingers had something to confess and were refusing.
"Do you ever play?" he asked, stopping at the threshold, the kind of respectful distance a man keeps when he knows he can cross at any time. She didn't flinch, which told him she had heard him coming 3 rooms away. The house taught its occupants to read footsteps.
"Not anymore," she said. "It makes the room too honest."
He tilted his head. "Honesty from wood and wire."
"Honesty from memory,"
she said. And there it was, the cinder that still glowed under all her jewelry. He studied the piano lid, the fine scratches invisible unless you knew how to angle the light. He had once watched her learn a nocturne here while construction dust still haunted the corners. He saw none of that in his face now. Adrian Cross had no ghosts. "Marcus says you have a gift for seeing where the currents run," she said suddenly. "Is that true?" "I have a gift for waiting where they take people who swim without a plan," he said, not unkindly. She almost smiled.
"So you profit from drowning?"
"I profit from offering rope to those who think it is a necklace," he said. "Marcus is a collector of ropes. I admire his neck." She looked at him then with something like respect and something like fear. She had worn both before.
"Who were you before you learned to speak this way?"
she asked. His pause was the pause of a gull catching a wind. "Hungry," he said, and left her with the piano and the lamp and the honest room. He began setting small fires around the edges of Marcus's empire. Nothing dramatic, nothing that made a headline. An overdue permit that someone forgot to renew. A zoning inquiry that surfaced as if by chance. A warehouse shipment delayed at a port because a container number resembled one on a customs watch list. Each issue, taken alone, was solvable. Taken together, they changed the weather. Marcus responded as men like him do. He worked his contacts. He threatened. He charmed. He threw dinner parties to remind people he existed. He spent money he did not have to keep lights bright. He grew short with staff, lenient with mistresses, generous with promises. He slept less. He drank more. Adrian made certain to hand Marcus a few victories. A lawsuit quietly disappeared after Adrian called a judge's friend to discuss civic needs. A lifeline of financing arrived just in time to prevent a lender from calling a covenant. Such rescues came with no visible strings. That was the seduction. Marcus began to call Adrian not merely for investments, but for reassurance. "Tell me it will turn," he would say into the night. "It is turning," Adrian replied, not specifying in which direction. Daniel stayed out of the papers. When photographers at galas tried to catch his name, he turned his face into the blur of movement and left captions starved. Mystery is a currency. He spent it carefully. He replied to Evelyn's tentative invitations with immaculate manners. He asked about charities and winter light, never about the past. She responded by speaking his name too often, as if saying Adrian would prove the man was not Daniel. She studied him, and he let her. A mind at war with itself is a landscape easy to cross. One evening, as snow rehearsed in the clouds but did not perform, Marcus proposed a venture that set Adrian's pulse to a tempo of delight. A luxury tower downtown, 39 floors of mirrored certainty, anchored by retail whose projections were born of a world that had stopped existing 3 years ago. It was the kind of bet that turns men into either legends or ghosts. Your appetite is unstinting, Adrian said. My courage is, Marcus corrected. Everyone else is cautious. I prefer to teach the market what it wants.
Markets are notoriously unwilling pupils, Adrian murmured. Marcus smiled the smile of a man who has never had to sit still.
They learn quickly when you speak loudly. Then let us teach, Adrian said. He agreed to anchor the financing with a bridge facility. He reviewed term sheets with a CFO who used to be Marcus's and was now his. He encouraged a contractor on the shortlist who had a history of delays to present a bid just low enough to win. He let the insurance broker misinterpret a clause in a way that would later become a catastrophe. He watched Mendez, the lawyer, sharpen terms on environmental indemnities until they hummed like taut wire. It was choreography. It was worship. It was cruelty spread thin enough to be invisible.
The house itself became his confidant. On a night when the ocean was restless and the wind turned the terraces into throats that swallowed air, Adrian stood alone in the atrium and listened. From the whispering gallery above came the faintest laughter, the trailing edge of a party in the east wing. Somewhere in the service corridor a tray fell, the silver ringing like a bell. The building exhaled. He felt the shift of pressure, the way a sealed door somewhere made the lanterns in the hall flare. He thought of the boy he had been, drawing spirals on a cheap pad. He thought of the man he had become, tracing ruin with the same care. He was both. He could live with that. He took 3 steps and stopped beneath a ceiling ornament he had once chosen purely for joy. He imagined it cracking, the sound, the scatter. Then he pictured Marcus standing there. He let the image bloom and fade. When he turned, Evelyn was at the end of the hall. She had removed her shoes. The silk of her dress whispered against the floor. "The house likes you," she said. "It should," he answered, unwilling to give her a lie she could hold. "I treated kindly." "Do you treat people kindly?" she asked. "When they are houses," he said. "When they have rooms and doors and an honest map." "And when they are not?" "I leave them to their own architects." She stepped closer. "Adrian, tell me something true." He looked at her a long time. Then he gave her the only truth that would do the work he needed done. "You are not happy." Her jaw set, as if against a blow. "Happiness is a word for children and poets." "And for prisoners who insist the cell is a chapel," he said. She held his eyes. "You speak like a man who knows cells." "I speak like a man who designs them." Something in her wavered, then righted. She lifted her shoes like 2 admissions and carried them past him, out into the wind. The house itself became his confidant. On a night when the ocean was restless and the wind turned the terraces into throats that swallowed air, Adrian stood alone in the atrium and listened. From the whispering gallery above came the faintest laughter, the trailing edge of a party in the east wing. Somewhere in the service corridor a tray fell, the silver ringing like a bell. The building exhaled. He felt the shift of pressure, the way a sealed door somewhere made the lanterns in the hall flare. He thought of the boy he had been, drawing spirals on a cheap pad. He thought of the man he had become, tracing ruin with the same care. He was both. He could live with that. He took 3 steps and stopped beneath a ceiling ornament he had once chosen purely for joy. He imagined it cracking, the sound, the scatter. Then he pictured Marcus standing there. He let the image bloom and fade. When he turned, Evelyn was at the end of the hall. She had removed her shoes. The silk of her dress whispered against the floor. "The house likes you," she said. "It should," he answered, unwilling to give her a lie she could hold. "I treated kindly." "Do you treat people kindly?" she asked. "When they are houses," he said. "When they have rooms and doors and an honest map." "And when they are not?" "I leave them to their own architects." She stepped closer. "Adrian, tell me something true." He looked at her a long time. Then he gave her the only truth that would do the work he needed done. "You are not happy." Her jaw set, as if against a blow. "Happiness is a word for children and poets." "And for prisoners who insist the cell is a chapel," he said. She held his eyes. "You speak like a man who knows cells." "I speak like a man who designs them." Something in her wavered, then righted.
She lifted her shoes like two admissions and carried them past him, out into the wind.
In the quiet of his townhouse, bare, minimal, almost monastic, Adrian kept a single drawer locked. Inside it lay a copy of the original mansion schematics, rolled and tied with linen tape. He did not consult them often. He did not need to. The lines lived in his hands. But on certain nights he unspooled the vellum across his desk and let his fingers follow the routes he had once charted for beauty and now used for war. Here, a hidden egress from the wine grotto to the maintenance crawl. Here, a muffled panel that opened onto the west parapet, perfect for a midnight witness to a private call. Here, the service elevator whose emergency bypass he had designed to stay powered even during a whole house reset, because he had loved redundancies then as he did now. Here, the notches in the stair stringers where a man who knew the code could count 5, wait 3, and hear footsteps before they arrived. He traced them with the reverence a priest might reserve for scripture, not because he worshipped the house, because it reminded him who he was and what was owed. He slid the drawings back into the drawer and turned the key. When the tower's first tenant backed out, citing market timing, Adrian brought a replacement to the table within 3 days. A tech firm expanding into physical experience spaces. They were splashy, well-capitalized, and privately intolerable. Marcus adored them. Papers ran headlines about adaptive urban luxury. Investors exhaled. Marcus toasted Adrian with a Bordeaux he had been saving. That night, Adrian stood on the 4th-floor terrace of the Hale estate and watched lightning fisher the horizon. The storm would not reach the cliffs, but it warned the sea. He felt the air's metallic edge and smiled. In the morning, Mendez sent an email thread by accident to the wrong A-cross, or so it would appear later. In it, the lawyer laid out the tower's web of indemnities and the precise scenario required to trigger a cascade of obligations that would strip Marcus of control while leaving him nominally responsible. It was a recipe, not a memo. Adrian flagged it, archived it, and did not reply. One day that thread would move like a fuse. For now, he wrote to Marcus, "The tenant loves your vision. Let's press the advantage while the market is watching." Marcus responded with a thumbs-up emoji, his sole concession to the modern tongue, a small vulgarity that made Adrian's mouth tighten. He did not forget himself in the work. That was the last luxury he had surrendered. In a hotel bathroom after a meeting, he caught his reflection and allowed Daniel to stand beside Adrian for a heartbeat. The eyes were the same, darker now, less given to hope. The jaw had aged into certainty. The mouth had learned to close before saying what it used to spill. He tried to smile and saw neither man. He saw the house. He dried his hands, smoothed his tie, and walked back into the lobby where a concierge bowed precisely, and a stranger's child stared at him as if recognizing a wolf in a suit. It happened on a Sunday. The house was quieter than usual. Staff had a half day. Marcus had taken the Bentley into the city for a lunch that would end as a boast. Evelyn wandered the galleries with a book she was not reading. Adrian stood beneath the whispering dome and called a number that still lived in muscle, not mind. The foreman from the Cliff House, now retired, who kept a set of keys he was not supposed to keep. "Mr. Ward," the old man said, after a hesitation measured in years. "Not anymore," Adrian said. "But for what I am about to ask, that will do." They spoke briefly. Arrangements were made. A favor was called in that smelled of salt and old loyalty, the kind that cannot be bought, only kept safe until needed. He ended the call and looked up into the cup of the dome. A footprint of sound returned to him, the ghosts of every whisper the house had ever held. He imagined distilling them into a confession so total the world would have no choice but to listen. Footsteps. Soft. He did not turn until Evelyn was almost beside him. "You like to stand here," she said. "It is a place that teaches," he answered. "What does it teach tonight?" "That voices always come home." She hugged the unread book to her chest. "And if what they say is unforgivable?" "Forgiveness is an invention for people who cannot afford memory," he said. She flinched, almost imperceptibly. Then she did something brave. She looked him in the face and said, "If you are Daniel, tell me now. And if you are not, spare me whatever game this is." He held her gaze, steady as stone.
"I am Adrian Cross," he said, "and I do not play games. I build them." Her throat worked. She stepped back as if the floor had shifted. "Then I will warn you once. Marcus destroys anything he cannot own, and I destroy anything I designed," he said, gentle as a lullaby. She left him there, the unread book small in her grip, and the dome carried away the tiny sound of the door closing.
That night, on a service monitor no one knew existed except the man who had specified it years ago, a series of cameras reawakened. Not the obvious ones that watched entrances, but the tiny, patient eyes embedded in the house's maintenance veins. Their feeds stitched together in a grid on a tablet Adrian unlocked with a code only muscle could remember. In one frame, the gallery. In another, the music room. In a third, the empty hall where the wind made curtains breathe. And in the last, the private study, where Marcus kept the documents he never let staff file. One valve opened. A slow pressure change began. Adrian closed the case, set the tablet in a drawer behind a panel whose seam only the designer could find, and exhaled like a man who had just turned the first page of the last chapter. The house seemed to lean in, listening. The masterpiece was waking.